This is Derrick Broze with the Conscious Resistance Network. And today I have a very important conversation to share with you, especially as we are approaching the next anniversary of the September 11th attacks. For those of you who've been following my work over the last decade plus, you know that I've covered 9/11 beginning in 2011, attending conferences and events in New York City, Washington, D.C., trying to raise awareness in Houston, where I'm from. And I've interviewed a number of guests over the years who've focused on different angles of the 9/11 crime and trying to bring truth, trying to bring awareness to that conversation. One of these folks is Mr. Ted Walter, who I last interviewed. I'm looking here at the website, September 17th, 2014. It was at the 13th anniversary when we originally talked, and this was when there was the New York City high-rise safety initiative, which I thought was a really creative effort. And now Ted is still in the fight 9 years later and continuing this journey. Ted, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Derek. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, well, it's always exciting for me to see people who are staying on the course of these topics, like such a big issue like 9/11. Obviously, the goal here would be 9 years later, the world has woken up and everybody has, realized there's questions about 9/11 that remain, and we have made progress. Unfortunately, I don't think that's exactly where we're at. I think progress has been made. I think there's public awareness. Like, just as one example, I noticed one of the Republican presidential candidates, Vivek Ramaswamy, he's been bringing 9/11 back to the conversation, and whatever people think about his policies, I kind of think it's a good idea or a good place to be that CNN is having to ask a presidential candidate, do you think 9/11 was an inside job? Do you think we were lied to about 9/11? That's some progress. But overall, in terms of actual investigation, like from a legal standpoint and bringing people holding people accountable, we haven't achieved that goal yet. There's still many people like yourself working on these efforts. So I wanted to give you a chance to come speak to my audience, those who maybe didn't catch our first interview all the way back in 2014, to give everybody a chance to see, first off, maybe you can tell about what you were working on back then and how that high-rise safety initiative went, and then talk about the work you're doing now with the organization you're involved now, and then we'll go from there.
We met back in 2014. I was working on the high-rise safety initiative, as Derek mentioned, and yeah, a lot has gone on since then. That was 9 years ago. At the time, the goal with that campaign was to try to get an initiative on the ballot in New York City that would amend the New York City charter to essentially require the Department of Buildings to conduct a new investigation into the collapse of World Trade Center Building 7 specifically. We kind of tailored the initiative such that it would be, if you amended the city charter, it would be retroactive, and then the Department of Buildings would have to go back and investigate it. And so we had a big campaign. We actually gathered enough signatures in the city. I can't remember the exact requirements, something like 30,000. Got to get 30,000 and 15,000. We gathered over 100,000 signatures from New Yorkers who wanted a new investigation into Building 7 and into 9/11. As happened in 2008 and 9, the first initiative that I worked on that I got involved in New York City, we were prevented from being on the ballot. It's actually very hard. Ballot initiatives are much more common in other parts of the country, especially in the West. In New York, they're not as common, especially at the local level, and it's very, very hard. All the sort of like all the things that you have to do, the limitations and the constraints on initiatives at the local level in New York are very hard to kind of overcome. And so every time you write legislation to try to get on the ballot and amend the city charter, there's a good chance that your law that you're trying to pass may not be legal, or that the city will argue that somehow it's not in compliance with the New York State Constitution or the city charter. So we ran into that. We did the best we could. We worked with some very good lawyers, and I think the city could have let it go on the ballot. Of course, they weren't going to. There was a lot of political pressure against it. Bill de Blasio was asked about it in press conferences, the mayor at the time. Nobody in the city government, that ran the city, wanted to see this on the ballot. And so we were turned down, and we went to court. We lost in court. So it was good, though. We raised a lot of awareness, I think, and just as we did with the earlier ballot initiative in 2008, 2009, that was trying to actually establish a New York City-based 9/11 commission that also ran into the same obstacle. So since then, I actually worked for Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth for 8 years, and left just at the beginning of this year. and started a new organization called the International Center for 9/11 Justice, which has a lot going on, and I'd love to talk more about. It essentially, for those of you familiar with some of the major organizations in the movement over the last 15, 20 years, the International Center for 9/11 Justice has brought together the Journal of 9/11 Studies, which has been publishing sort of the cutting edge 9/11 research since 2006, as well as the International Center for 9/11 Studies, which has been renamed the International Center for 9/11 Justice, and that organization hosted the Toronto hearings in 2011 and published the Toronto report a year later. And then the 9/11 Consensus Panel, which was started by leading 9/11 scholar David Ray Griffin and his colleague Elizabeth Woodworth, and published about 50 consensus points of that 20 experts in the 9/11 truth movement agreed on were solid evidence. Was brought together those, and we also, besides all the research that we're still publishing, that we're still conducting, we are also spearheading a number of initiatives, which I'd be happy to talk about.
Before we get into that, I just make a remark about the high-rise safety initiative again, just that I really do applaud those to try to get the 9/11 topic into the conversation in a way that obviously people didn't want the conversation in there, but I do just want to take a moment to applaud you and everybody. I'm sure it was a whole team of people who were involved with trying to bring 9/11 to the conversation on the local level in New York City. I think that is just really, really important and really incredible, and of course not surprising to see it kind of blocked that way in the courts, not ruling in favor of investigating Building 7.
Thanks, Derrick. And I know you understand the importance of working at the local level. So with your efforts to to run and do things in Houston and run for mayor and whatnot.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's like 9/11 is such a international topic, but it's big on the national level in the United States, of course. But New York City, where it actually happened, I mean, in my experience, when you go to New York City around 9/11 or just any events related to this research, when you talk to New Yorkers, there's plenty of New Yorkers who have questions about the event. So it's not surprising to me to hear you say that you got over 100,000 signatures of New Yorkers who were like, yeah, this sounds like a reasonable question, a reasonable investigation. So yeah, I just want to underline that again. Please continue. Let's hear more about what the International Center for 9/11 Studies is doing.
Yeah, so the International Center for 9/11 Studies was founded in 2008 by an attorney named James Gorley, who wrote several significant scientific papers in those days with folks like Kevin Ryan and Stephen Jones, these major figures in the 9/11 truth movement. And then, as I mentioned, hosted the Toronto hearings in 2011, which were important hearings held in Toronto on the 10th anniversary, bringing together almost all of the sort of leading researchers in the 9/11 truth movement. And eventually that resulted in a report that is sort of mirroring or responding to the 9/11 Commission report of real evidence that had been gathered over the past 10 years regarding what really happened on 9/11. The organization went fairly dormant for the last 10 years. And then after I left AE 9/11 Truth, Architects and Engineers 9/11 Truth, early this year, I approached James and the other people involved with that organization and basically pitched them on relaunching the International Center for 9/11 Studies as the International Center for 9/11 Justice, and bringing together these other organizations that sort of in the same cluster of groups doing credible, really good 9/11 research. And so that's what we ultimately have done over the last 6 months, is put together this organization, and this group of organizations, and relaunch the center. And the website is ic911.org. So as I mentioned, the Journal of 9/11 Studies is one of the pillars of the organization. It's been publishing research since 2006. And it is now, all of that information now, you can find it at the old website, journalof911studies.com, but also on the new website, ic911.org. And we're publishing new papers. The journal itself hadn't published that much in the last 5 years, and now is publishing papers again on a monthly basis. So we just, in June when we launched, we published a paper that I worked on with David Chandler, who's well known for studying the collapse of Building 7, especially also the Twin Towers, on an engineer named Tony Zambodi. We published a new paper on Building 7, which looks at how the entire roof line, we could actually, finally, if we've measured it all the way across the roof line on two sides of the building, and we've shown that the top of the building actually goes into free fall instantaneously. A lot of your listeners, your viewers already knew that the building came down in free fall, but now we've actually kind of verified that not only did it go into free fall, but the transition to free fall was instantaneous, which completely rules out any possibility that it was a series of structural failures that led to the collapse. Not that most people have any doubt when they look at it, when they study it, but we've ruled it out completely. If there was somehow free fall was going to occur as a result of a natural series of structural failures, the transition to free fall wouldn't be instantaneous, but it was in this case. And so that's very carefully documented in this paper. We've published a couple of the papers since then. So that's one major aspect of what we're doing. We're also spearheading initiatives like the family in the UK, the family of Geoff Campbell, who was killed in the destruction of the North Tower. His brother in particular, Matt, has been very active over the last several years, and his entire family are now involved in trying to open a new inquest into Geoff's death on 9/11. The process, an inquest, which is not that this process doesn't really happen in the US, is basically a sort of a fact-finding mission by a coroner to establish the facts and the cause, the sort of proximate cause of somebody's death. And so there was an inquest in 2013 for Geoff and the 9 or 10 other British 9/11 victims who they repatriated remains for, their physical human remains. Now, mind you, 60 people, roughly 60 British citizens died on 9/11 in the attacks, and they only were able to collect remains for 10 of them. So this speaks to the fact that a huge amount of the victims of 9/11, their bodies, there's no trace of their body has been recovered, which is just more evidence that these buildings were blown up. But we're talking about very small pieces of fragments of bodies and so on, and 40% of the victims still haven't been identified. So out of those 60, 10 had their remains repatriated to the UK, and there were inquests held in 2013 for all of them, and concluded that the airplane that hit the North Tower ultimately caused its collapse and therefore Geoff's death. So the family, Matt Campbell and the rest of his family, are challenging that finding and saying that there's actually overwhelming evidence that was not considered at the inquest that disproves that conclusion, and so they're asking for a new inquest. And unfortunately, this was originally submitted 2 years ago. In August of 2021, the family submitted their application for a new inquest, and just a couple months ago, finally heard back from the UK Attorney General, who is the first hoop that they have to jump through. And the UK Attorney General denied their application, which is actually unlawful, and we are going to now appeal that decision by the UK Attorney General. Matt's family is going to appeal it, in which they're going to be filing their appeal documents over the next month, essentially. I could go into some of the details about that, but essentially it's supposed to be very easy for families to open a new inquest if there's any new evidence or evidence that wasn't considered at the first inquest that could possibly, conceivably change the verdict. And the Attorney General has essentially broken the law by denying their application, because the evidence that they presented on the face of it is overwhelming. And so there's certainly a possibility that could change the verdict in the cause of Geoff Campbell's death.
And so is that something that people can find more about on the website as far as that specific appeal of the inquest? Are you guys going to be following that?
Yeah. So we will be documenting that over the next month, their appeal. If you go to the website, we actually just took it down, but if you go to the website and you go into the news section, you can go back a few stories from July and learn more about the family, to see the statement that they released back in July when the Attorney General denied their application. So we will be doing that. And I think personally for me, this is one of the most important initiatives happening in the 9/11 Truth Movement right now, because it actually presents a real opportunity to have a real investigation in the court of law. And there's not that many, right now, there's not that many avenues available to us to try to get a new investigation, given the political and the legal sort of blocks on this issue being looked at. So this is actually a very promising thing. This is a slam dunk, the application for a new inquest. It was a slam dunk, and the Attorney General has completely wronged the family. And so we are actually, although the judicial system in the UK is probably not very, probably corrupt, the law is so overwhelmingly in the family's favor that we think that we have a good chance of winning on appeal and actually getting this new inquest. So people can go to IC911 follow it.
What would be the best case scenario there, Ted? Like, so obviously they win the appeal, a new inquest happens, but if the inquest did indeed find in favor of the family and concluded something like, hey, the death was the result of, explosives or something like that, where would it go from there? What would be the sort of, I guess, next step in that process?
Yeah, so that's a great question. There is actually no like automatic legal ramification that would be triggered if the coroner in the inquest were to conclude that it was explosives that brought down the building, that Geoff Campbell was killed in the demolition of the North Tower. It's not as if that automatically triggers the authorities in the UK to then go and investigate it, or anybody else for that matter, whether in the US or world bodies, what have you. However, we think that the political impact of that finding would resonate and reverberate throughout the world. I think that in general, it's important to not speak as the 9/11 families as a monolith, but in general, I think there's a lot of 9/11 families out there who would hear about that and would be educated about what may have really happened that day, and would then demand a new investigation. So I think it would really galvanize overall the 9/11 family community and the public in general to start demanding a new investigation. I think it would be very hard for the mainstream media. Not that we depend on the mainstream media, but I think even for the mainstream media, it would be hard for them to ignore this, dismiss it, what have you. So that's the goal here. And I think we could very quickly lead to a full investigation by British authorities as well.
Yeah, I think that, so it's kind of, even if it doesn't lead to any other, at the moment, legal ramifications, it gives those of us out here who are either trying to speak to people about 9/11 through the internet or still on the streets passing out flyers and things like that, it gives us another talking point, to say the least, to say, look, this investigation, X, Y, and Z, and this is why we should continue to ask questions about this. So whether it's a legal victory or not, it's something that we could use in the propaganda battle that we're really dealing with.
Absolutely. And even though it doesn't have immediate legal implications, it is like inquests are taken very seriously in the UK. When there's an inquest on a controversial topic, they're widely reported, the results of the inquest. So it's not it's not just going to disappear. Of course, we will have to work to publicize it. The media will not be keen to cover it positively or at all, but I think that ultimately there won't be a way for them to ignore it. I think it will be widely known about.
Great. Yeah, I plan to write about it, and obviously we'll publicize that as widely as possible as we can and follow that story as well. Before we talk some more about some of the other projects that you guys have going on, because I know there's an upcoming documentary, I just wanted to ask your personal opinion and experience, Ted, because you've been in this probably as long as I have been, or maybe even before, and I know you've worked with a lot of the leaders in the movement, so to speak, who've been doing the really crucial work. Have you found in the last decade any kind of change politically, and in terms of like either representatives, administrations, whether it was Obama, Trump, and now Biden, like have you seen any sort of shift, whether positive or negative, in receptiveness to the 9/11 conversation?
I would say yes on the ground among regular people, absolutely. At least, where I live, people that I talk to, parents, I have a young child, and I talk to other parents, and I talk, just people my age, people a little bit older, a little bit younger. Like by and large, when I talk about what I do, 9 out of 10 times the person is either open-minded or already very supportive, right? Now I might live in a very specific place. I live an hour north of New York City in the Hudson Valley, but I think that's probably the case in a lot of places. And I think we've kind of seen, wherever you are politically now, unless you are like a diehard, I'm very in the middle. I trust every mainstream source there is. Regardless, I think people are more skeptical than ever, and I think that bodes well. And I continue to have, although it's an uphill battle, I continue to have real hope. And 9/11 is not the only issue, obviously, has people up in arms and very skeptical. There's many issues, 9/11 being one of them, and to some extent these issues are connected. So yeah, I think the climate is good now for this to be reopened or to be reconsidered in general by the public. As far as higher levels, officials, and so on, you see, like you said, Vivek Ramaswamy, he's talking about it. I think it's creeping in that there's more of a willingness to talk about it. there's and a little bit more pressure, and I expect that to increase. You know, there are little cracks in the dam forming everywhere. I see, in my view. You know, several months ago, Tucker Carlson was on Redacted with Clayton Morris and mentioned Building 7. You know, and that seemed to just put something in the water that like people here and there are a little more open to talking about it. And I think it's perhaps a matter of time before Tucker Carlson himself does a serious look at 9/11 and goes beyond the sort of Saudis and hijackers and stuff and goes further. So I think we're going to see that relatively soon.
Yeah, good signs to see, especially as we are now approaching the next anniversary of the September 11th attacks. And I know that you guys are working on releasing a new documentary. I had the pleasure of just watching it this last night. And it relates to, as you said, 9/11. It's not just 9/11 itself, but obviously 9/11 is connected to the issue of war, the war on terror that many of us have lived through the last couple of decades. I was in high school when 9/11 happens. So we've witnessed it, and we're seeing this sort of ramifications of the war on terror playing out in other areas, the security state as it relates to things like COVID-19. So 9/11 is extremely important. It connects to war, it connects to privacy, surveillance, etc. This new documentary, it looks at the life of researcher Graeme MacQueen and his work on 9/11, but also his life in general and his views on war. Could you tell us more about that and when people will get a chance to check it out?
Yeah. So, yeah, thanks for watching it. I just love sharing it with people, and it's been an honor and a joy to make this film, which I started working on a year ago when my friend Graham told me that he only had months left to live because of the cancer that he'd been living with for the last few years. And so I asked him if he would be willing to do this interview, and he agreed to do it. We did it last October. Graham passed away this past April. So this documentary is very much sort of his final words, his transmission, which is a word that he uses in the film, to the world. You know, before his passing, Graham was a leading scholar in the 9/11 Truth Movement. He studied one of the things he's best known for is the eyewitness accounts of explosions in the towers. He studied the tens of thousands of pages of oral histories produced by the fire department in New York and found 118 eyewitnesses to explosions among the firefighters. And he did other very notable research as well in the dynamics of the collapse of the North Tower. And so a lot of these things are covered in the film. Prior, and he wrote a very important book on the anthrax attacks and connecting the anthrax attacks to the 9/11 attacks, showing ultimately that the anthrax attacks were basically a botched attempt to pin the anthrax attacks on Al Qaeda and Iraq, and together frame them for the anthrax letters, which fell apart pretty spectacularly because some scientists started saying there's no way that this anthrax came from Iraq, and it must have come from U.S. labs. So that's also documented in the film as well. So the film covers a lot of ground, but it ultimately stems from Graham's interest in peace. He's been and being an anti-war activist for much of his life. He died at the age of 75, and probably for 50 years or more of his life, he was a very dedicated anti-war activist. And he ended up he taught religious studies at McMaster University in Canada, but he also he ended up starting something called the Center for Peace Studies at McMaster, and so he was a professor of peace studies as well. And so the whole discussion of 9/11 grows out of the sort of framework that he uses to talk about peace and war as a system, and not just war as a series of events that happen when one country decides to invade or bomb another country, but that the war system is ever present and all around us. And, both in the trillions of dollars that we spend every year, that the U.S. spends and other governments spend every year on armaments, etc. But even in various aspects of our culture, and it just permeates everything. And so he talks about the war system and that there being a cold phase when there's not active killing, and then a hot phase when there is active killing. And he talks a lot about, and he's written a lot of papers on this, war triggers, being these events that do occur that are more often than not either managed or manufactured to get the war system from a cold into a hot phase, to basically to start active wars. And so 9/11 is essentially the mother of all war triggers. And so he talks about that, and most of the film talks about 9/11 and a little bit about anthrax. And Graeme dedicated the last 17 years of his life to studying 9/11 because the ultimate war trigger for the war on terror, which was everything that he was against and the opposite of what he stood for. And so he dedicated himself to trying to end the war on terror by studying the 9/11 attacks. And so all of that story, both Graeme's analysis and his personal story, is all brought out in this film. And we're very excited about it. And we think it's a very moving, compelling way to present this information to audiences who are not yet familiar with it.
And I don't know if we've said already or if you guys have released the title of the film, but would you like to share what the title is and when people can find it?
Yeah, sorry about that. So it's Peace, War, and 9/11. Just that's it. Those are the things that it's about. Peace, War, and 9/11. And it's going to be, we're having the world premiere next week in Hamilton, where Graeme lived and taught. That's where McMaster University is, in Hamilton, Ontario. And then it's going to be coming out online on YouTube. Should be on September 8th. So keep an eye out for that. There's a couple different channels where it may actually release, so that has not been set yet, but you can find out on ic911.org when it comes out next Friday. We'll also be having a New York premiere on Sunday, September 10th. So if you're anywhere near New York City, it's at Cinema Village. Come check it out, 6 p.m. the eve of the 22nd anniversary, and you can find the details about that premiere at ic911.org.
Awesome. That's great work. I definitely recommend everybody, if you can make it in person, either of those screenings, go for it. If not, look for it online. I will be sharing all the links you've referenced today, Ted, in the show notes, and of course the website. Any other final thoughts you'd like to share with everybody? What are the ways people can help? Obviously, I'm sure donations for work like this help, but is there anything more direct people can do? Share the information, get involved in any kind of way?
Yeah, I mean, share the information. ic911.org has it all. It's practically a clearinghouse now for the best 9/11 research that's out there. As I said, the Journal of 9/11 Studies, the Toronto Report, the 9/11 consensus points are all there. So just use that as a resource to share this information with folks. We're also, for example, right now we are republishing Kevin Ryan's book, Another 19. Was published a decade ago. It's one of the most important books in the history of the 9/11 Truth Movement, and it's now available for free on our website. So go check it out. That'll be easy to find if you go there right now. So share the information. Don't be afraid to talk about it, and ultimately have faith that that we can still get justice in this effort. That's why it is called the International Center for 9/11 Justice, because we are not looking backwards. We are looking forwards, and we're dedicating ourselves to getting justice for this event in our lifetimes. And so I encourage people to talk positively about 9/11, about why you care about 9/11. It's because it's a vehicle to creating the world that you want to see. So that's the last thing I like to encourage people to do.
I love that approach, Ted, and I do think it's a valuable approach to take in the 9/11 truth movement, which is obviously a monolith itself, and there's different viewpoints and sometimes infighting and this and that, but to have a kind of positive, forward-thinking approach focused on justice is probably the way we should be going forward now, 22 years past this event. And I encourage everybody who's hearing this, will be released pretty soon here as we approach the anniversary. Look out for this documentary, look into what's going on with the inquest in the UK, and follow the work that Ted and his team are doing so you can be apprised of all the 9/11 information you need to know. And most of all, share it with your family. Don't be afraid to talk about this. So thank you, Ted, for joining me today. I appreciate you. And as always, everyone, remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free. Since 2012, the Conscious Resistance Network has been an independent media organization focused on empowering individuals through education, philosophy, health, and community organizing. We work to create a world where corporate and state power do not rule over the lives of free human beings. Our motto is leading by example and helping others in their pursuit of freedom. Visit theconsciousresistance.com to find our articles, documentaries, interviews, podcasts, books, and more. Remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free.